the most important piece of coach speak for fantasy football players that we heard all spring is that more this week on the couch with Greg Brainos, the Coachspeak Index. So you're going to give us a definitive answer to this question, right? Well, maybe you're going to teach us when you tell us the most important piece of coach speak from the spring for fantasy football players to pay attention to.
Jameson Williams is pushing to be a full-time starter. He is a man on a mission.
Yeah, okay, this is a great place to start. Because Coach Speak, and folks, if you don't know, Coach Speak Index, follow it on Twitter. Know it, live it, love it, because I love the work you're doing, and we're going to delve into it. And we'll start with Jameson Williams, because I think what's really interesting about Jameson Williams, Greg, is that when players get off to a rough start, when they stumble out of the blocks, positive coach speak can actually be a negative, right? I'm sure one of the things eventually you can do is like the 13 types of coach speak, right? Or there's whatever, insert number, you know what I'm saying? And one of the types of coach speak, or a subtype, like we could do like positive, negative, and we could start like trickling it down, right? But there's a certain type of positive coach speak, which is when a player has been struggling, especially a young player, especially a highly touted, highly invested young player. The positive coach speak is actually a negative, because you can tell that they're just trying to say something positive. Like they're just trying to find something positive because they don't want to hurt this kid, usually a kid, confidence. I can say that I'm 48. They don't want to hurt their confidence, but this time with Jameson Williams, it feels different.
Yeah, and some people point to it as excuses, but like he hasn't been available to really be on the field and be a part of that offense. And the great thing about this piece of coach speak is that we know Dan Campbell is so reliable with depth chart coach speak. I mean, really across the board, his coach speak, very reliable. I love to point out the example of last year when they acquired Denzel Mims in the offseason. They asked Dan Campbell, hey, how's Denzel Mims doing? What's his outlook for this season? And Dan Campbell said, he's in the room. That's about all I can tell you. And they cut him like a day or two later.
Right.
This guy isn't playing smokescreen games.
Right. Right.
What he says, you can trust. And he hasn't come right out and said, hey, Jameson Williams is our wide receiver too. He's just said that he's pushing to be a full-time starter. He has kind of hinted at it, talking about other players saying, hey, that wide receiver 3 spot is open for somebody to step up and play that role, which kind of intimates that, all right, well, I guess the wide receiver 2 spot is claimed, which would be Jameson Williams. So it'll be really interesting once training camp starts to see and hear exactly what Dan Campbell says, because those beat reporters are going to ask him about Jameson Williams many, many times throughout training camp.
Yeah, it's great. One of the things I want to ask you about that we'll get into is, I feel like your exercise of cataloging. Well, look, I'll step back and say this, and I want to tip my cap to you, sir, good sir, because way, way back when, I thought, when we started Draft Guys TV and when we made our mottos, our 3 different principles, right? Coverage for the thinking fan, breaking down barriers, glory to the game. That I wanted, and Matt Waldman is one of my inspirations here. I thought we can almost make, in Football Outsiders too, like a football lyceum, like a university, really. And each of us become professors of different things. And I feel like you have started the Coach Speak college at our football university, and you're just like, well, no one's doing it, so I'm going to do it. And you're out there and you're doing it, and it's awesome, because it's a way, maybe that's like, it's kind of like our calling in a way to try to forward knowledge, but it can be frivolous knowledge. But this part doesn't seem so frivolous, in that when you spend all this time with the coaches, you kind of get to know them, you know? And I think that Dan Campbell and what you described about Dan Campbell matches what we already pick up about him anyway, right? And probably what the players love about him, probably like part of why he's so successful, even. Even though coach speak should be one of the things I like about Dan Campbell and how he handles coach speak. And like you said, he's pretty straightforward, like Mark Twain. I'd always tell the truth, so I don't have to remember what I said, right? I think Dan Campbell just looks at coach speak as like, why would I play what's games or whatever? Like, okay, this is part of the job. He was a player too. Media availability, ask me questions, I'll answer the questions. And he doesn't really get into subterfuge or pondering this the way that everything he says is going to be magnified. Oh, I know you guys are going to run with this or whatever. Like, some coaches have a more antagonistic relationship with the media, right? Depends on the market,
Absolutely.
depends on the coach. But Dan Campbell is a straight shooter. So I guess since I brought up that subject, well, first I want to ask you about reliability ratings. You mentioned reliability ratings.
Mm-hmm.
So and what's cool is I can tell you already are doing your own subtopics like depth chart coach speak, right? Because we can even get into, well, there's an overall reliability rating, but in so much as we can say the coach has gone into these different areas, maybe, this is where, if they ask him about injuries, he's reliably unreliable. Everything else, he's a straight shooter. So you mentioned the reliability ratings. And I love that you add that context with most every piece of coach speak you put out there in social media. What's the process for making reliability ratings?
When I first started on the database, I thought, okay, a coach is going to be reliable across the board or unreliable. They'll just either be a liar or they will tell the truth.
Mm-hmm.
And as I was compiling all the information, going back in the spreadsheet in the database, I have the date of the coach speak, I have the player, the position, and I just added, okay, let's do different areas, right? Injury and depth chart and all
Mm-hmm.
that, and found out that Zach Taylor was kind of the inciting incident for me
Mm-hmm.
finally creating this, because he called Joe Mixon day to day with his foot, and that lasted for weeks.
Right.
And I was like, all right, I'm tired of getting rug pulled, and I'm going to do this. And I found Zach Taylor, injury coach speak, completely unreliable, but then his player usage and workload coach speak is pretty reliable. So I thought it was really important to break it down
Mm-hmm.
into categories, and it's just helped tremendously.
Yeah, well, and it makes sense. It's kind of internally consistent. Dr. Gene is definitely an emeritus professor at Football University, and I learned so much just listening to him talk, because he would say things like, "Oh, players always exaggerate how far along they are. So if a player says he's 90%, then he's really probably like 75%, And
Mm-hmm.
then you start interpreting like, well, geez, if it's the eve of the season, he's saying, yeah, I'm about 90%. You're like, ooh, he's not doing well, and you incorporate that in. And then he started very similar to you. He clued us into really early that Green Bay is super conservative. Like Green Bay's medical staff is really, really conservative about putting players back
Yeah.
on the field. And you start to just see these patterns, and then you test your hypothesis with each new piece of coach speak, and it's really cool. I guess to get to some good red meat before we get into some open-ended topics, you did an awesome tweet where you said, these are the players I'm higher on, and much like Dr. Gene, you're already contemplating like, yeah, I know why you're interested in this, because we want to use it to be actionable in fantasy football. I want to ask you about a few of the players that you put on the list of you're feeling more positive about based
Sure.
on coach speak. All right. And you can just
Mhm.
tell me why. Let's start with a player whose own player speak, I want to ask you about as follow up. But Kyren Williams is one of the players you're higher on because of coach speak.
Yeah, Sean McVay just loves Kyren Williams like a second son. I mean, you go back last year and look at when Kyren Williams came back from missing 4 weeks on IR. They asked Sean McVay about the offense with and without Kyren, and he was like, "Man, this is night and day. Our offense is so different when Kyren Williams is playing," and that is why they went out and got Kyren Williams 2.0
Mm-hmm.
in the NFL draft. They don't want to miss a beat when Kyren Williams misses time with injury or just needs a breather. And the Rams GM Les Snead said in an interview, yeah, us taking Blake Corum, that is just to take some of the wear off of Kyren Williams. So I think, worst case scenario for Kyren Williams is going to be like a 70-30 split. So often we just automatically assume that these running backs that are taken in the draft are going to pan out, right? Like, oh, they got Blake Corum, he's going to be 50-50. Right. Sean McVay loves this guy. Well, we know who Kyren Williams is. We don't know what Blake Corum in the NFL looks like, but best case scenario for him, I think, is about a 30%, just from the way that they talk about Kyren, from the reasoning that they gave why they selected Blake Corum. I mean, when they asked McVay and Les Snead about Blake Corum right after the draft, they start talking about Kyren Williams. Like, they absolutely love this guy, and I think they're going to run more than people expect them to this year. We look at what Sean McVay has done with the offensive line, really beefed it up. I talked about this the other day on another pod, how the average weight for an NFL offensive lineman is 315 pounds. They have one, maybe two guys that are 315. The rest are like 330, 345, just like really big dudes. Sean McVay stays ahead of pretty much everyone else in the NFL as far as like the curve that he's on. He sees linebacking cores getting smaller and smaller. So he's like, all right, I'm just going to beef up. We're going to run the hell out of the ball. And hey, we got Matt Stafford, Puka, and Cooper Kupp. It's an offense that I want to invest in. It's pretty narrow. They don't really spread the ball out much. It's going to be Kyren and the two receivers, and that's about it.
Yeah. And DeMarcus Robinson. Don't forget about DeMarcus Robinson.
Yeah. Good late round dart in best ball. I like it.
Well, and they like him. I mean, he was good. He was good down the stretch last year with Kupp and Nakua on the field.
Yeah.
And he and Stafford, I think, have a really good connection. But I love this is on the couch. So I love that the first place you went. See, this is why we're simpatico. Is you could be very clinical about this, Greg, and you could just record the coach speak, code it. You could probably make like a super robust coding. I told you before we went on the air that I was in IT, and I do understand a little bit about setting up a database, and the initial decisions on the database kind of direct the work that you can do with the database. Like you said, you added this code. Geez, I can think of all kinds of attributes of coach speak. You might even eventually get in there like who asked the question and things like that, right? But you go the extra step that I always do and would, and you're going to psychoanalyze the coach. You're not just going to take the words at face value. You're not just recording the words and saying, here's everything Sean McVay said about Blake Corum or Kyren Williams, and you can read it and decide for yourself what to do or what it means or why he said what he said. Go ahead.
Yeah, no, it's so important, I think, and I do know these coaches really well. I've spent so much time with these guys. So like last year when Kyren Williams was out, that first game that he was out, and they asked Sean McVay, hey, what's the rotation going to look like while Kyren is out? And they asked him about Zach Evans specifically also, and he didn't give an answer, which I knew was very weird for Sean McVay, because he's kind of a chatterbox. He'll answer pretty much any question. And for him to not answer that question when he's asked about Zach Evans is like, okay, he doesn't want to answer the question. And okay, why doesn't he want to answer the question? Well, this is a rookie that they just selected. And if he says now, Zach Evans, he's not ready, we can't put him out there, that looks kind of bad on the franchise, right? So he says, well, I don't really want to talk about it. Like, we'll see what happens. And he ends up kind of burying Zach Evans again when another question is asked, of basically saying like, okay, he's not going to play. And everyone was adding Zach Evans on the waiver wire, and I was like, do not add Zach Evans. It's not going to be him. Like, really think it's going to be Darrell Henderson and Royce Freeman, which it ends up being Darrell Henderson and Royce Freeman.
And what's important about the story you just told, Greg, is that the information in the coach speak was not just, if you did a transcript, you wouldn't get that out of it.
Yeah.
It has, the context comes from, like you said, knowing the coach, which just takes time and being receptive and open. I'll have a little empathy even. And then you start realizing that sometimes the most important information is an omission. It's not what they said, it's what they didn't say, or
Right.
it's how they say it. It's
Yeah.
something that's nonverbal. And what I like, and I sense, Greg, just from the way you handle what you're doing, that like me, like you believe in the power of intuition. Like you're willing to rely on intuition. Like your intuition says, I'm getting this feeling about this. And you say, like, look, I'm just in disclosure. It's what I feel, but this is what I'm feeling about this. This is what my advice would be. Go forth and prosper, as opposed to just being, again, clinical and saying, well, this is what he said, and I'm not going to commit past that. And you still could do a great service for fantasy football and even human communications. The idea of like, there's all kinds of stuff we could get into that has nothing to do with football, about just what happens when people know that their words are amplified. And how some people are good at it, some people are not good at it. Some people can accomplish things with it. Some people can think they're accomplishing something, but actually accomplish something totally different. It's highly psychological, and you're looking at not just what they're saying. You're looking at everything you've learned. So I want to actually harken back to, you've inspired me, Greg. I want to harken back to the original On the Couch, because I tried to be like too gimmicky or psychological, but I think this is a very psychological subject. Gosh, this is like the subject that this show has been waiting for. So we're going to do word association. Okay.
All right.
Like, I'm just going to say a coach's name,
Yeah.
and you just, well, like, and it doesn't have to be just one word, but you get it. Like, it's just the first thing that your brain retrieves when I say the name of the coach.
Let's do
Because
it.
you've spent time with all these guys,
Mm-hmm.
right? I mean, so you know them. Okay, you ready? Here we go. Mike Tomlin.
Poet, surprisingly.
Yeah. Oh, you added surprisingly.
Mm-hmm.
What,
I mean, not many people think of Mike
right.
Tomlin in that
Oh,
way. Yeah, but
yeah. You're
man,
saying against, yeah.
you watch his press conferences. I mean, sometimes they'll be like 3 minutes long. Sometimes they'll be like 30 minutes. And oh man, just you can tell he is one of the most well-read coaches
Yeah.
in the NFL.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Well, and part of poetry also is, again, feelings, emotion, right?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, what I would say about Mike Tomlin and coach speak is, wow, you can kind of tell what kind of mood he's in,
Oh yeah.
He's
Yeah.
moody.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't mean moody like he's erratic or something like that. What I mean is like sometimes, I mean, and I'm a Steelers fan. I think that I would say almost incontrovertible. Okay, I'll ask you, I'm going to flip this around, give you an open-ended question. Which of the 32 coaches would be the one you'd want to hang out with?
Oh man. I mean, Dan Campbell for
Oh,
sure.
sure.
Seems like a really fun hang. Matt LaFleur, I think, would be
Ooh,
a fun guy to hang out with. You see him making, some jokes here and there during the press conferences. Seems like a nice enough guy. I think a lot of like the Shanahan tree
ooh.
people, although maybe not Mike McDaniel, I maybe we'll skip that
Well,
one.
well, we have to delve into that. I mean,
Yeah.
you can't say, but I think that it's interesting. I mean, different guys will be good hangs for different reasons. I mean, I like
Mhm.
that Dan Campbell's the first guy that jumped into your mind, in the sense that, like, one of the things that I always talk about with Dan Campbell is how much he uses the word love, and just how
Mm.
much love. Pete Carroll is like that too. Pete
Yeah.
Carroll was like, oh, my heart just swells when I think about Pete Carroll and what as the human being. We were just mourning the transition, joining the ancestors of Bill Walton, and
Mhm.
I feel like Bill Walton and Pete Carroll are like cut from the same cloth from a soul point of view, just like they what radiates from them, and how that is part of their success. And love is part of that. And I think Dan Campbell really radiates that. I brought that up with Mike Tomlin because I think there are stories, and there's always stories. I'm from Pittsburgh, and there's a lot to unpack here. There's stories that, like, Mike Tomlin, like, literally in the driveway with like a 12 pack or 24 pack of beer, like hanging out with his neighbors,
Oh, wow.
that and the thing is, I think sometimes in the coach speak, you can see that in him. You
Mhm.
can see how winsome he is, and how, you know, he's when he's feeling good, he's just immensely likable. But there are times, Greg, that you see the weight on his shoulders.
Oh yeah.
Right? There's sometimes he goes into those press conferences and he's meeting with the media and the weight. And what's amazing is, and I think Mike Tomlin has kind of sort of intimated this a little bit, but not very much because it's kind of part of his persona to not do it, is that he has endured and carried things that he will never tell us about, that we don't need to know about, that if we knew about, we would say like, wow, Mike Tomlin deals with a lot. And if you're from Western Pennsylvania, I don't need to say anything more. He deals with a lot. Okay. And sometimes he shows you a little bit. You pull back from the other. Look at what I'm carrying on my back, like with this franchise and everything that goes along with it. So sometimes he seems like a good hang, and then sometimes it's like, wow. Bill Belichick was similar. I mean, Bill Belichick could be like the most grim guy, but then if you ask him about Navy football, he goes on this 10-minute soliloquy and like lights up, and he's the most interesting, charismatic speaker. Okay, let's go back to some words. And I like that you mentioned Matt LaFleur because he doesn't have like a big persona. I don't think he's one that people think of as like, Sean McVay. Yes, big persona. You mentioned Mike McDaniel. So let's go and talk quickly about Mike McDaniel, because I will say this. When Mike McDaniel got hired, I said, boy, I hope. And Mike McDaniel is a football guy. I mean, he wanted to be on the team at Yale. I think he was like a workout warrior, but he was so, even for Yale, he was slight enough. They were like, yeah, I mean, let's get you involved in other ways in the football program. Right. But so he's a football guy in that sense. But I think the way he handles press conferences and the way he handles his job, I feel like he's the closest thing there is to one of us being a head coach. And I'm not talking about JJ Redick and that kind of thing. I'm talking about somebody who like is first and foremost like really cerebral about football and leads with that, or is willing to like put that into action in a way. We've had some come this way, like Bill Belichick, for instance. Chip Kelly, I think, is another interesting guy, where they're willing to look very wrong. Like they're willing to do stuff that might make them look really stupid. But number one, it's in the name of winning. But number two, they believe in it. They believe in innovation. But when you said as far as a hang, though, Mike McDaniel, maybe a little bit of reluctance. Go on.
Yeah, I mean, what you were just talking about what the closest one of us to being
Right.
an NFL coach. I actually think that might be Kyle Shanahan.
Okay.
Kind of really embodies everything that you were just saying.
Sure.
Mike McDaniel, and maybe he'll mellow out a little bit over time. I'm not sure. His press conferences are so long, and he really doesn't say that much. I mean, you look at what he said about the running back room after the draft, after they drafted Jalen Wright, and they asked him, "Hey, what's this rotation going to look like?" And he gives this weird answer of it's of supreme importance that whoever has the ball does right with it, and that's who it shall be. Yeah. I'm like, oh man, this is brutal, and just comes off as a little bit of a try hard in the like he wants everybody to like him so much. He desperately wants these jokes to land, and I mean that's fine. Like that's his personality. He does seem away from press conferences like a really cool, nice guy. Maybe he'd be a great hang. I don't want this to come off like I hate the guy. I don't at all. He's he's not. I mean, if we're going to talk about guys, I don't enjoy watching their press conferences. Dennis Allen and Sean McDermott. Sean McDermott probably the worst because his are super long and never like it's just all cliches. It's just all cliches.
Right.
And the beat reporters can almost lead him into saying whatever they want, right? Like they'll ask a question early in the press conference, and then later someone will kind of reword the question in another way that almost leads to an opposite assumption, and he'll kind of agree with that one. So yeah, just really difficult getting stuff out of those press conferences. Mike McDaniel is usually at least good for a non-actionable clip, and every once in a while he'll give us something nice and actionable, like talking about Jonnu Smith.
I was going to ask you about that. So let's go ahead and make this a nice, discreet thing, because I am with you, and I intuitively it set off some bells for me when he was asked about Jonnu Smith. Tell me why you think that is the rare, actionable Mike McDaniel piece of coach speak.
Yeah, what really stood out about that clip was Mike McDaniel saying, just because the way something was, like the way that we viewed something, the way that we think it was, doesn't mean it will always be. Which, man, you hear something like that, my ears just absolutely perk up. And you're looking for, okay, is this just some kind of like throwaway thing? Well, that probably not, right? And then you look at, okay, is what he's saying around that and after that, like, is there synergy between that? Does it make sense? And it absolutely makes sense with Jonnu Smith. Like, this guy is a yak monster, like Mike McDaniel said, and they had no third receiving option last year. They had Mike Gesicki, right?
Right.
Huge difference between Mike Gesicki and Jonnu Smith in that offense. So there's room for someone. They went out and got him. They obviously wanted him. They obviously now have this plan for him in the offense, while defenses have to deal with Devon Achane and Jalen Waddle and Tyreek Hill. And now you've got a guy who like really smashed in Tennessee and did pretty well last year in Atlanta as well. Like, we know what this guy's traits are and his profile. This is someone who can have some really, really big spike weeks. Maybe you're not super comfortable with him on a weekly basis in redraft. Maybe he's just a bye week fill-in. But there's a chance that in full PPR leagues, Jonnu Smith might be playable more weeks than not. But in best ball, when you're getting him so late, usually tight end 3, right? Oh my God, just like the upside there is unbelievable. So very in on Jonnu Smith. I do think he'll be a thing in Miami.
Absolutely. And we talk about synergies. I would make the same observation of, number one. So here's a fun one, Greg, if you want to try to reverse engineer this. I'm pretty sure that when a coach actually uses the phrase fantasy football, okay, when he says, I would get this guy if I played fantasy football, right? Follow that. They're not all going to hit. They're not all going to hit. But when they hit, wow, do they hit? Because the coach is basically, again, so there's a thing about coach speak, and I think just the whole idea that you've tackled this acknowledges this. It is an art or a folly, or it's a stage, and the coaches, if they don't know, I can't imagine you could ever get to be an NFL head coach and learn handling media at that point. You probably have had some experience, and boy, if you haven't, it's going to show pretty quickly. And you're looking at, in this case, and this is why I brought up when they say fantasy football, it's almost like Mike McDaniel is saying, I know what you're thinking. I already know what you're thinking, and I'm telling you it's wrong.
Yeah.
Right. And he's saying, like, whatever, some people, I would like to lift that phrase and use it about, geez, Greg, how many players could we apply that to, or situations or teams? Like 50 this year? Don't assume that what it was. One of my pet peeves about all the data-driven fantasy football advice is it's backwards looking, and it assumes that the bounds of what can happen are set by what has already happened. And boy, being alive for the last, I don't know, 5, 10, 15 years shows the bounds of what can happen tomorrow isn't based on what happened yesterday and all the yesterdays. And Mike McDaniel's coming out telling us that. Like, don't assume the usage, because they know we're hyper analyzing all this usage and cutting it up 17 different ways and trying to find patterns and things like that. Well, now AI is on the case. My point is, the best intelligence is still going to be from a human being that's analyzing this, and what is telling at first is that he's saying, like, well, I know what you're thinking. You're wrong. I will use a tight end when you have a tight end like Jonnu Smith. And then you said, then listen to what comes next. Run after catch. Oh my.
Mm-hmm.
Because I think that what has Mike McDaniel has done, there's those scatter plot charts, and that's awesome. I mean, visualization information, at the very least, it starts great conversations. And you look at the charts that are based on chunk passing plays, and the Miami pass offense is all way off in that upper left where you want to be, or upper right. I don't know my right from my left still. My point is that Mike McDaniel, and yeah, give Tyreek Hill and Jalen Waddle and Tua credit, but still, if it was this easy, everybody would do it.
Mm-hmm.
He has figured out how to create spacing in defenses. This is why Achane and Mostert, and now add Jalen Wright, who, by the way, is also a perfect fit for what they do. But Jonnu Smith, the bully that he is in the open field, put in situations where, like, boy, if the first guy doesn't tackle him, look out. Oh, I might be still my beating heart. This is exciting. And I've tried to do a little kung fu flip. I'm my brain's putting these words together. We talk about, well, Jonnu's not there to block Kyle Pitts anymore. What if it's Kyle Pitts isn't there to block Jonnu anymore?
Mm-hmm.
What if Kyle Pitts was holding Jonnu back? It can be both. I love it. Jonnu's one of the players I wanted to get to. Another player I wanted to get to is really a whole class of players, because I think that when we talk about coach speak, there's really at least 3 elements to coach speak. Okay, there's the actual speak, like the words. Really, there's that fourth of like the stuff that you can perceive by watching it and also by knowing the coach. But here's like the discrete pieces of coach speak. There's the speak, the speaker, and then the subject. And some subjects are more important than others. And I like the way you've cut it into like injuries and depth chart. At this time of year, rookies as a subject is like, okay, I'm sitting up in my seat now. You're talking about the rookies. I want to hear what you're saying. You like Lad McConkey based on the coach speak out of LA. Tell me more.
I do. Yeah. They, I believe it was Greg Roman talking about how they want to use them like a Swiss Army knife. Jim Harbaugh also really big on Lad McConkey, and whenever they, again, going back to the synergy, whenever they say something that aligns with, for instance, Matt Harmon's reception perception on Lad McConkey, it's like, okay, now I'm really paying attention here. Lad McConkey, one of the best route runners in this draft this year, and that wide receiver room is just so open. They're not going to run the ball 60 times per game. They are going to pass. They've got an incredible quarterback in Justin Herbert, and yeah, they take Joe Alt instead of Malik Neighbors or Roma Dunze, but they still make sure to get a high quality pass catcher and spend some good draft capital on them. I mean, you look at Lad McConkey versus the other guys in that room. I mean, he really seems like the best option there.
Yeah.
And yeah, I mean, just a really good wide receiver who people are sometimes afraid to take because his helmet looks too big for his head.
Right. College production, point yards per route run or something. Mm-hmm. But here we have a good quarterback, a wide open wide receiver group. They just got rid of their top 2 receivers, and coach is saying, yeah. And the important thing you pointed out again, it's beautiful. I mean, I don't even have to do anything. You do it for me. Alignment. And what that means is someone we trust like Matt Harmon or Matt Waldman or Doug Farrar, whoever you like, when they have watched a player and they come to a conclusion, and then you hear the coaches reaffirm that. Because one of the things, oh my gosh, how many times can we see it coming through coach speak, Greg, that they're going to misuse a player? They're not going to use them right. Mm-hmm. And that should be that red flag, but come back to that player later. Like maybe Quentin Johnston, same team. Maybe Quentin Johnston is a guy, and they have said, now they do have a picture of Quentin Johnston that is accurate when they're like, we want to get him in the ball where he can like have a runway, or they've said something to that effect. But what that tells me is they wouldn't have taken him in the first round.
Right. Yeah.
Unless you're the Panthers, you're not going to take that guy in the first round. But Lad McConkey, it all, like they're saying, we're going to use him in a way that is going to magnify the importance of stuff that we already are pretty sure he's good at. That's great, and it just gives you confidence in the coaching staff that they're seeing players accurately. They're going to get the most out of the players that they have. Kind of a quick, like a lightning round, because I've got 5 other rookies that you mentioned. I think those are the only. And I just want you to like just briefly say like what about the coach speak about this player has got you paying closer attention to them. Okay, Jermaine Burton.
The way that Zach Taylor acted in the draft room when they took Jermaine Burton, I mean, just pounding the desk. I thought that thing would break. Just going absolutely nuts, overtaking Jermaine Burton there.
Yeah, and it's going to be funny. I think these two guys are going to go together then, because Burton and AD Mitchell. So there you already know who I'm going to ask you about. These were the most polarizing draft prospects as far as what are you actually going to get. And I think in both cases there were off-field questions. And that's a whole, boy, we could do an hour or more on just the whole topic of like off-field questions and how it should affect how we view players. But what in the case of Burton and in the case of Mitchell, I think you got a strong, it wasn't like, well, we have to take him. Let's see, the wide receiver coach has sold me on him. Oh, you better be right. It's like, oh my God, we got him.
Yeah.
Does it apply to Mitchell too?
Absolutely. I mean, Shane Steichen used almost those exact words of like, I can't believe we were able to get this guy. The GM, Chris Ballard, also really into it. The offensive coordinator, Jim Bob Cooter, loving him. They're talking about how explosive he is at the top of his routes, talking about his one-on-one abilities, what great hands he has. I mean, everything that you want to hear from the coaches is what they're saying, and kind of coincides with reports that we were getting from OTAs on AD Mitchell. They, and that whole Mike McDaniel, what we've seen, what we think might not actually be this year. Well, we saw Anthony Richardson and Jonathan Taylor for 1/3 of a game together last year, and they almost make the playoffs with Gardner Minshew at quarterback. I mean, this is going to be such a bully ball team between Anthony Richardson, Jonathan Taylor, probably Jelani Woods a lot at tight end, and now you got this big-bodied guy and AD Mitchell alongside Michael Pittman, and then an incredible, slot possession receiver in Josh Downs, one of the best offensive lines in the league. I mean, this Colts offense is going to be so fun this year.
It is. It could just exceed expectations across the board. And one of the things that gets me excited about the Colts, well, look, secondary thing is I love the plan they have. When I look at the elements they have together, I see cohesion of Jelani Woods in the middle of the field, Josh Downs out of the slot, Mitchell and Pierce. I mean, Pierce still is a useful player as far as being an outside receiver who can win jump balls. And then, of course, Michael Pittman, that first read on 3rd and 7. And then you have 11-on-11 football with Anthony Richardson, who they confidently went strong to the hole to get him. Tons of confidence in him. And then Jonathan Taylor, who they did eventually get the owner to pay. So there's confidence there too with his, just downhill wrecking ball with speed style. And I think, wow, Shane Steichen understands that if you ask a defense all of these questions with a formation and personnel set, they can't answer them all. They just can't. They're going to have to leave some door open. And then it's the object of the play calling to find that door. And there was somebody, one of the Colts beat writers just posted, or maybe it was a fantasy football guy, my brain, but somebody had just posted it, that here's a bunch of examples of within a game, Shane Steichen just hammering a play call. Just we're like in different games, it's different things, and I didn't even watch the reels, to be honest, to see how successful it was, but that he's even willing to do that. It's like to this week, this part of our playbook is going to be important. This week, this other, that tells me he's actively in the game. And then the last thing I'll say about Steichen is that we saw how much the loss of Steichen hurt the Eagles. I mean, I think, and he was also Justin Herbert. Remember when we all thought Justin Herbert was going to be like the superstar quarterback? That was Shane Steichen. Shane Steichen was part of that story. So yes to all that. And Colts, it's all of a sudden the AFC South is kind of a fun division. How did that happen?
It really is, man. It's the young guns.
It is. And Jelani Woods, you mentioned, is another all Coachspeak team from the spring. The rookies. Again, I want to try to get to 2 or 3 more, but I'm belaboring things. Jalen and McMillan.
Oh man, the arrow is so up for Jalen McMillan. Todd Bowles kind of buried Trey Palmer and the guys. Talking about McMillan. Well, first he was talking about the versatility that McMillan has to play all 3 spots at wideout and how intelligent he is, and like they you can tell how much they like him, both Bowles and their new OC Liam Cohen. And then Bowles said that the other McMillan is basically in front of the other guys, the non Evans Godwin guys. So I think they'll play a decent amount of 11 personnel. Liam Cohen coming from the Rams as their OC a couple years ago and spent last year at Kentucky as their OC. But I think we see a good deal of 11 personnel there. And I think Jalen McMillan ends up being that wide receiver 3. And where he's going in drafts right now, really late, just a really good pick. And if something were to happen to one of the top 2 guys, that versatility that he has is so important because they can just plug him at any spot. And I think it's going to be pretty decent offense again.
Oh yeah, it should be. One of the things, talk about coach speak, one of the things I like about Tampa this year is that Liam Cohen, and they lost Dave Canales, and if you like Dave Canales, that means, well, maybe you like Bryce Young and Carolina a little more. But one of the things that Liam Cohen said is that he came specifically to work with Baker Mayfield. And the Baker Mayfield comeback story, I've said this, I'll keep saying it. It starts with the Rams with Liam Cohen. That's where it actually starts. So when they had to replace Dave Canales, Liam Cohen to say, no, I want to come and I want to work with Baker again. Oh, I'm paying attention because there's something there for both of them. But you mentioned Jalen McMillan, and just reverse engineering this coach speak on Jalen McMillan, Greg. I feel like they're all saying, this guy can play already. Like, wow, we can put him right out there. Like rookies, we're not sure. This rookie, he's ready. They feel like kind of like Puka Nacua last year, where you could tell like they were like, look what we got. Woo. Mm-hmm. And they didn't know until they started to see him at practice. They're like, wow. Because they've seen guys on the practice field for years and years and years. And when it stands out, this is one of the things I irks me. And obviously with the work you're doing, I know that you would agree when people say, I don't even pay attention to what coaches say. Whatever. I don't care. I just tune it all out. Just stick with your board. Tune it all out. No, there's look, only after the fact do we learn which information really was good or not. And we're also learning about intentions, and the human factor comes in, and we can nail down intentions. And then after 3 weeks of the season, intentions are torn up and thrown out the window because other things happen. But that's still important in fantasy football. But these coaches are telling us things. And with rookies in particular, and I think rookies see somebody who's going to start player speak index, because with rookies, specifically with rookies, when their teammates are like, yeah, that guy can play, and it's multiple, especially if it's like a defender talking about an offensive player, pay attention to that, because they're telling you like, yeah, this guy's ready. He's advanced. There's a lot of that about Puka Nacua. And I think that it's meaningful in the way that you can say, if this guy is going to be a hit, this is how the story starts. The fact the story started this way doesn't mean he's going to be a hit, but this is how the stories that end up being hits start.
Right. It's one of the necessary components.
Right. And with Jalen McMillan, we're there. And I think that it is also a material upgrade for this offense, especially. I noticed, by the way, on that subject, Chris Godwin also on your all coach speak spring team.
Yeah. Liam Cohen in his first, I believe it was his first press conference with the Bucs, said that they want to move him back inside to the slot. They want him to occupy that, I think he said F receiver role that Cooper Kupp occupied when Liam Cohen was with the Rams. Todd Bowles also said Chris Godwin makes his living on the inside. That's where he's best, and we plan on allowing him to do the things that he does best. And we saw in Godwin's, I believe, first 3 seasons, slot snap rates in the high 50%, low 60%. Last year it was, I believe, low 30%, like 31, 32%, something like that. So this year, a lot more Chris Godwin in the slot.
Right. A usage alignment again.
Mhm.
When we see that positive usage alignment, then we should be interested. We should be excited.
Which also makes you
Yeah.
think that they're going to play a lot of 11 personnel, right?
Yeah.
If they're going to have him in the slot a lot, it doesn't mean that he's going to be off the field when they're in 2 wide receiver sets. So like you imagine he's on the field in 2 wide receiver sets, and they say, "Hey, we're going to play him in the slot a lot." They're basically saying we're going to play a lot of 11 personnel.
Right. Right. Again, this is the master class, right? Because it's all these context clues that they're giving us. Again, it's information that's conveyed, not explicitly, and it doesn't all work out. They're not all going to be hit. It isn't like, oh, Greg Brainos here is the skeleton key for fantasy football. Like because that's what keeps us coming back. It's unsolvable. I mean, for the coaches themselves, for the players themselves, it's unsolvable. And you'd line them up and let them play on Sunday and see what happens. But this is what keeps us coming back. And this is such important information, especially just going about it in this regimented, disciplined kind of way. And again, I invite somebody to do player speak. Do the player speak index. I mean, like I said, there's Gene Brown will tell us about how players exaggerate how far along they're on with their injuries. And then we have players talking about other players. And of course, players talk about themselves. Real quick, because I hinted at it with Kyren Williams. Kyren Williams said, when asked about Blake Corum, like, oh, yeah, he's really good. He's a really good runner. So I'm looking forward to maybe having a chance to like run routes out of the slot or show more what I can do as a receiver. I'm like, I'm actually, did Kyren Williams just tell us that he's going to lose carries to Blake Corum? I'm not saying that's what's going to happen, but that's the question my brain says. Like, is he revealing? Is because he's talking about it, not the coaches. He's like, yeah, I'm looking forward to this. Anyway, player speak index. Last thing I'll ask you before we go off the rails, okay?
Yeah.
Tell me a player that based on what has been said or not said about them in the spring that you're lower on because of coach speak.
I mean, we're God. That's tough.
Or a situation or a team.
Yeah. It's not really as much the coach speak on this player, and we'll just stay with the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, but I'm pretty down on Bucky Irving. Just because he's one of the worst pass blocking running backs that came out of this class. The most carries a sub 100 or sub 200 pound, I think. Maybe it's sub 190 pounds, but most carries that a smaller running back has gotten in a Todd Bowles head coach team is 3 for a season. And that's with 5 different offensive coordinators. So it wasn't even like an OC type of thing. And just the type of person, like the type of coach that Todd Bowles is, and Liam Cohen coming from the Rams and Sean McVay, who has a really high standard and bar, I don't think they will abide a running back in the backfield who is not good at pass protection, especially with that offensive line. Should be a little bit better this year, but not anywhere near the top of the league. And yeah, I'm pretty down on Bucky Irving.
Yeah, I think that delving into what Liam Cohen has said about the backfield there is interesting too, because the other thing that happened there was he said we're changing the running game, and we want guys who hit the hole right away, and Bucky Irving does that, and we've been talking to Rashad about that. And of course, you just have to watch Rashad White. He's not Le'Veon Bell, but he's not fast to the hole. I mean, this is not his style.
Way too patient.
But like you said about the 11 personnel, if it's 11 personnel, it doesn't matter. I mean, coaches, even if he's too patient, if Irving can't pass block, then it's not going to matter. And these things will sort themselves out. They will sort themselves out. Oh, last thing I will say about Greg, I want to give a plug because the best calls are the ones we don't get credit for because they didn't actually hit, right? You had tickets on Brock Bowers going to the Rams and Brock Bowers going number 8. Am I right?
I did.
So I just want to say on your behalf, and then and we'll go start off the rails with the emotional side of that. that, the betting markets with draft. I mean, because you're as a professor of coach speak, of team GM speak, of team speak, you're also learning that market of how, and I'm assuming your coach speak skills, your team speak skills, in part led you to put the tickets, and they were big winner. Like the odds were low on. I mean low, like on it happening. It was like a big multiplier if you hit on your tickets, and you were right because the Rams tried to trade up to number 8 to get Brock Bowers. You were right. They should
Yeah.
have. Go ahead.
Oh my god. Yeah. That's just kind of the way it goes. But yeah, and anytime I see really good value on something, like you got to take your shot there. And with Brock Bowers, just knowing how much Sean McVay values like a really good tight end, I think they had this vision for Brock Bowers in their system, and like they could just like, oh man, we got to get this guy. And once I saw the report from Diana Rossini that they were trying to move into the top 10, I made that bet that Brock Bowers goes in the top 10, and a bet that the Rams take him, and also that bet that they take him at number 8 because there's the connection with Sean McVay and Raheem Morris. Obviously, that they have a good relationship, so I thought maybe that they'd be talking to them. I thought it would be smart for Atlanta to move back. I knew that this is another piece of it, is I knew that they really liked Leatu Latu. And I thought that was going to be the guy that they drafted, and I thought he'd go later than 8. So, they could move back with the Rams and then maybe jump back up to, the like 13th, 14th,
Right.
or whatever, right in that area. He ends up going 15th. So yeah, didn't work out, but that's fine. Like I've been betting a long time. I've been playing fantasy a long time. Sometimes you hit these big ones, sometimes you don't. I hit Lamar for I think 50 and 60 to 1 MVP in 2019. Hit him again last year for 15 to 1 and 16 to 1. And yeah, it's the process, right? So sometimes the results don't work out, but if you stick to the process long term, you're going to be fine.
Yeah. And again, you're another person that could be angry at the Michael Penix pick. Like, why didn't you just do what you were supposed to? Why did you take Michael Penix? Because if you did what you were supposed to, you would have traded down with the Rams.
But I think that's good for fantasy for Atlanta this year, because instead of taking a defensive player, which they really needed on that defensive line, now obviously the defense not going to be quite as good with them not selecting a defensive player, with them selecting a guy that's not even really going to see the field.
Fair. I like that.
And if Kirk Cousins gets injured,
right,
number 8 pick coming in, probably will do all right. Definitely an upgrade over Desmond Ridder.
Right. The only team that would get the only team that's better off. I'm sorry, my words are coming all at once, so I'm stumbling over them. There's one team that would be higher in the backup quarterback rankings for fantasy football, and that would be the Indianapolis Colts, because they've got Joe Flacco. That's a weird situation where it's like, if you have any pass catcher on the Colts, I'm not saying you would want Anthony Richardson to be hurt, but it's the one team where you're like, well, that's not really necessarily even a bad thing. It might be the best thing. The best thing here is getting to hang out and talk football and fantasy football and all these different cerebral subjects. Now, we chatted briefly before we started recording, Greg. You're a dual citizen of France, and what is it like? I mean, do you feel like you're a true dual citizen? Like, do you really feel like a kinship with both countries? Both countries have shaped who you are. What is it like to be a dual citizen?
I mean, it's honestly pretty cool. I was born here in France and lived the first 4 years of my life here. My dad was French, so feel pretty close to my roots. Now, spent the majority of my life in the U.S., so I love cheeseburgers, so I feel like an American as well. But if France and the U.S. are playing the finals of the World Cup, I'll be rooting for France. Yeah.
No, that's a good way. That's a good way to boil it down. Or just that you would pick that shows your French consciousness, because Americans are like, who cares about the World Cup? They shouldn't be. It's one of the best sporting events
God,
ever. It's a truly epic sporting event. Yeah. And of course, as we discussed, I'm down here in New Orleans, the most French city in the United States, and very much holding on to its French roots. Interestingly, a lot of the French roots here are not strictly because it was a French territory, a French colony. It's because when the Haitian slave revolt happened, a lot of the refugees ended up here. A lot of the Saint-Domingue is what it was called. A lot of the planters and a lot of them ended up in Cuba too. There's actually like French parts of Cuba because of that. And that was a big, and that doesn't happen until the early 1800s. So things have been going on here for like 80, 90 years, 1720-ish, before that happened. And then there's those 40 years in there when Spain controlled it. And a lot of things I think that a lot of the things that make New Orleans what it is now are because of the Spanish period. Napoleon just kept like selling Louisiana or losing it. I mean, as soon as he'd get it back, he would like sell it or lose it again. And
like monopoly,
right? And Spain risk, and Spain, the French Quarter is with, I think maybe one exception, Spanish architecture. Anyway, tell the folks out there who aren't familiar with like French culture, like something that would surprise them about the way of life in France. It's different than the U.S.
Well, like most European countries, very, very walkable, pretty much everywhere here. Good rail system, subway system, slower pace of life for sure. Take a lot of walks here to the beach. I'm like a 5-minute walk from the beach here, and then a 15-minute walk from a slightly bigger beach in Deauville. And I mean, people here are just like having a great time. And one thing that I don't care for, that you don't really see in the U.S. is, I mean, it happens in the U.S. where, waiters and cooks and restaurant workers will smoke, but they'll do it like out back behind the restaurant where patrons can't see them. In France, they're just doing it right out front of the restaurant. Yeah. And I'm just thinking, man, I wonder if they wash their hands when
right. I remember that. I mean, I haven't been to Europe for almost 20 years, but I remember even the attitudes about cigarette smoking were a little bit different. But I think that you hit on a lot of things about the way of life that is probably, I'm 48, so I'm getting older. So that sounds pretty good. Actually going to see my favorite French band in October. They're coming stateside. Air. Incredible. What about French music, like Serge Gainsbourg or?
Yes, love Serge Gainsbourg, Jacques Brel.
Oh, yes.
There's one I always mess up his last name. It's Charles Aznavour or Razad something. Edith Piaf, Juliette Greco. Yeah, just this guy they call I think Clo or Coco, Claude something. Yeah, just God, such a rich, beautiful history of French music.
Yeah, and then if we started talking about French film, that we would need more than another hour.
Yeah. That's another.
That's exactly. But there's enough to fill up many podcasts with Greg Brainos' work, the Coachspeak Index, on Twitter, but much more enlightenment for all of us to come from there. Thanks for being part of the journey. Thank you, everyone out there, for being part of our journey. We wouldn't be here without you. We are so grateful for the privilege and pleasure to serve you because you're so classy.